Hey, how's it going, guys? Today I wanted to do a video on Hotswap and how to make just about any keyboard Hotswap because that's a feature that a lot of people are looking for in keyboards, and a lot of boards just won't come in Hotswap varieties or Hotswap PCBs. That is changing. I do see a lot more Hotswap boards than I did even just a year ago. But that said, there are still certain boards that just don't come in Hotswap. Or if you do like, say, a particular layout, oftentimes a Hotswap board won't accommodate that. For instance, let's say you like HHKB layout. A lot of times things like split backspace isn't going to be available on a Hotswap board. It'll usually just be normal ANSI or ISO layout. And yeah, I just want to address that and let you know how you can make just about any board Hotswap. So let's talk about Hotswap sockets. What most people will think of are Kailh style Hotswap sockets, which look a little something like this if my camera will focus. Excuse me. Reasons why I need a proper camera. But yeah, that'll just give you the general idea. And as much as it would be nice if we could just solder these onto any PCB, that isn't going to work because these solder joints are further out from where the actual pin goes. Sorry, that's blurry again. Things aren't focusing, but yeah, that's the reason that you can't just slap Kailh Hotswap sockets onto any board. But these are specifically made for keyboards, as far as I'm aware, and they do function great. The only issue is that if you do put in a crooked switch, a lot of the times it'll kind of mess with the mechanism, and sometimes you'll have to bend your pins to get the socket to work properly. Just be careful with it and you shouldn't have any problems. So rather than using Kailh Hotswap sockets, because most of the time you aren't going to be able to, you can use Mil-Max sockets. And so there's these tiny, tiny things that you would solder in. Oh my god, you can't even see it. But you solder them into the pinhole, and it functions basically the same way a Kailh Hotswap socket will. The only difference is that a Kailh Hotswap socket will have two kind of prong things that grab onto the pin like this, whereas on a Mil-Max socket, it's going to grab it all around. And I believe that's because Mil-Max sockets weren't specifically designed for keyboards, because I can get them at really any major like uh, electronics parts wholesaler or anything like that. But you will still need to solder. So that's kind of the downside if you are looking for a solderless option. Unfortunately, this isn't going to be it. You basically, if you want something that doesn't look super scuffed, you're gonna have to look for a board that comes Hotswap. But moving forward, my SK Ergo is mil-maxed, and it is a pretty simple solder job. I'd say it's just as simple as soldering in switches. But yeah, some people have said that these sticking out on the bottom, as you can see here, can cause issues. I've never had that before, and the only way I can see it being an issue is if the PCB is literally touching the bottom of the case, which I don't think many boards have, if any. But all the same things about Hotswap are true with this. So you will want a plate. So even though this SK Ergo doesn't have a plate, that was, I just wanted to mil-max this. But the switches do kind of just come out super easy. So having a plate for a mil-max build is going to be pretty important for usability. And yeah, of course, you do want to put these switches in perfectly straight, or as straight as possible. Even more so with Mil-Max sockets, they're a little less forgiving with regards to that. And there's one more issue that I'll show you on my Nyquist. So with how a board like the Nyquist is mounted is it uses the top plate to hold the PCB and all that. And so that means there's no support on the bottom, which can be a little bit iffy when, say, putting in a switch. So whenever I change switches on this board, which is fairly often, what it'll do is, if you can see where I just put in that switch, right here, the PCB is drooping down a little, and this is a stabilized key. So a lot of the time, it won't work out as well as it did this time. You can still see the drooping, but sometimes it'll kind of make the PCB sink down enough where a PCB mounted stabilizer won't connect to the keycap well enough. And because it's all crooked, the forces or something are uneven or not the way they should be, causing some rattling, which I have had before. Not in this case particularly, but on occasion when I do change out switches, it does happen. So that can be quite annoying. That's just something to note if you are gonna min-max a board. So one other, I guess, concern that people have about min-max is that some switches will fit pretty tightly. And there's a super old chart somewhere around on the internet that shows how tight certain switches fit into min-max sockets. But that is really outdated, and a lot of modern switches aren't going to be listed on there. That said, I personally haven't had any issues with any of my switches, so I've tested with everything fit well, so I don't think it's something that you really have to worry about. If anything, I'd worry more about the fin and the plate, which oftentimes isn't an area to worry about to begin with. So yeah, I don't think it's as big of an issue as some people have made it out to be. So yeah, there's that. So let's talk about the different min-max sockets. The ones that are most common are 0305, which are the only ones that I've used, which again, you can barely see in my hand. But there's also 7305, which is quite a bit more expensive, but it is just a little bit shorter. I don't think that's worth it. I don't think there's really much tangible benefit there. And again, that potential issue of having the stem kind of stick out too far, I've never had that issue, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I've also seen some people using 3305, I think, but I haven't heard too much about that. If you're really looking to min-max a board, I say 0305 is your best bet because it's one that people have tried. It's affordable and it's easier to solder than 7305. So yeah, one thing to note as well, you need two for each switch, right? You need one for each pin, essentially. Metal pin, not the plastic pins. But yeah, that's another consideration. So let's say you're doing 70 switches, you're going to want at least 140 sockets. So yeah, but they are super cheap, so I wouldn't worry too much about the cost front there, unless if you're going 7305. So why do I min-max my boards? So it obviously comes with the benefits of normal Hotswap being able to pull out the switches, pull out the stabilizers, service them, make sure everything feels and sounds good, right? The normal benefits of Hotswap. But I think the bigger benefit here is being able to make boards that are in a bit of a niche category or just don't come as Hotswap boards into Hotswap, right? This is a Nyquist, it's a 60 key ortholinear split, and it's pretty niche, right? And the chances that something like this is going to come as a Hotswap board are pretty unlikely, at least in my opinion. So I had to go and make this Hotswap myself, which I did. Because I do want those benefits of being able to swap out switches and swap in different stabilizers and all that stuff, right? And another big benefit is being able to pick your layout essentially. So for example, here I have a 2U key, while a lot of ortholinear folks also like 1U keys here. And I got to pick what switches, what sockets I wanted to have as Hotswap. So being able to set that up myself and personalize it was really important. And for example, also on this SK Ergo, if you look up here, you'll see min-max sockets for a split backspace, where you also do have the option for a full backspace, but I went the route that I personally wanted, which was a split one, right? Having that option is really important to me. And while you do sometimes get those options on a Kailh Hotswap socket board, they often end up looking a bit messy, and sometimes switches are oriented a little bit strangely. So for example, here is the Prionic PCB, which comes Hotswap, and in the bottom row, just down here, you can see that there's just this cluster of Hotswap sockets, which looks-wise, it's fine. Like, I don't really care about the looks of the bottom of the PCB, but you end up with a weird combination of north-facing and south-facing switches. So if, say, you used a cherry profile set on something like this, you may end up with some keys that interfere. On this case, it wouldn't, but just as an example, for like say a full ANSI board, if you have options for say a shorter right shift with a function key beside it or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of the concern there. You end up with minor incompatibilities, I guess, where the board isn't unusable, but kind of can ruin the experience. Not necessarily ruin, but make the experience less enjoyable. So yeah, just having that option there. And again, a lot of boards that do come hot swap are kind of restrictive in what you can do. For example, I'm working on a new board where I wanted split space bars, but the hot swap version only came with a full space bar, which isn't really to my liking. It does look nicer in my opinion, but typing wise, I personally prefer split. So I ended up having to go soldered for that. So let's start wrapping up this video here. So I do still really like Kailh hot swap sockets. I actually like them more than Milmax, but sometimes you only have the option of Milmax or soldered boards, right? So that's an option you have, and I feel like this was kind of important to talk about because not a lot of people talk about Milmax for some reason, and the videos that I have seen talk about Milmax don't really explain it to any real extent or its benefits and all that. So yeah, that's why I figured I'd talk about this. And if you do have any questions about anything that I talked about in this video, just leave it in a comment down below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. But yeah, again, I do like both options. One option's kind of reserved for if another isn't available. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.